was nice, Zuko thought, to wake up and not sit around for hours waiting. Instead, he woke to find the small camp bustling with activity. The men with the spears were back, sharpening their weapons and poking at the cooking fire pits scattered around the clearing. They didn't seem to be benders, but like many soldiers, they had long gotten used to waking with them. Jong sat apart from the others near the river shore, meditating in the sun. Without a word, Zuko joined him, simply breathing to move his chi and relishing in the gentle warmth of the rising sun. It felt like there was something more to it now that he knew that he was actually working toward being a proper bender again. Nothing had actually changed, of course. Nothing to do with the sun, at least. But now he had a nugget of hope reflecting its warmth. A small clatter beside him brought the boy's eyes shooting open. The sun was much further than he expected it to be. He had been meditating for a long time. The others would be awake any second. Oh. He turned to see the clatter was Katara, setting a ceramic bowl of congee at his knee. Zuko blinked in surprise at the traditional Fire Nation breakfast. It even smelled like the usual spices that kept it from being a gelatinous, flavorless mush. The girl smiled at him, an odd expression on her face. Well, not that odd. He'd seen it before, just not directed at him. Zuko, good morning. I got one of the soldiers to teach me how he was making breakfast. I figured you'd be the best one to tell me if it tasted okay. Besides, I know how you get when you meditate. I know if I didn't bring you something now, it would only been old by the time you got to it. Despite her words, she didn't seem to be complaining. In fact, she seemed almost fond. Oh, thanks. He took a bite and smiled at the familiar flavors, filled with enough cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger, that the rice was taking on a tannish color. It wasn't exactly spicy, but it was full of flavor. It's good, he said simply, taking another large bite. The girl smiled as well and took a bite of her own. Her face scrunched for a second as she tried to get used to the flavors. But in the end, she must have decided she liked them because she smiled before taking another bite. It is good, and it's something I can feed both Aang and Sokka without needing to substitute any ingredients, which is basically a miracle in and of itself. Zuko snorted. Are the others awake yet? Not Sokka, she snorted. Aang is, but he's checking on Momo and Appa. I was kind of surprised that Zhong didn't wake him up. You know, the whole rising with the sun thing. Zuko frowned and stretched his hands to the sky. Yeah, it's weird, but Zhong is known for being a really good master. I'm sure he has his reasons. The teen tilted his bowl to get the last of the meal out. He felt it hit against his forehead, and Katara let out a soft snicker when he brought it down. You have a little... With a quick swipe of his hand and a bit of water from the stream brushing across the fabric of the scarf wrapped around his head, coming off slightly opaque with the congee she was wiping away. Another flick of the opposite wrist and the cloth dried. Thanks, he said awkwardly. She was acting weird. He didn't have time to think about that, though. The action had reminded him of his mask. I have to find Zhong. I need to talk with him. She looked puzzled, but nodded, pointing up a hill a bit. I think he was talking with one of those guys with the hawks. Zuko nodded, handing the bowl over when Katara reached for it, running up the hill. He arrived on time to see a messenger hawk take flight. Zhong dug down to speak to the hawker with low, serious words. He stood back until the men were finished, before moving to speak with the firebender privately. Sifu? He asked hesitantly. If you would, could you... They don't know who I am yet. The elder bender frowned. I am not sure I understand, Prince Zuko. They don't know that that I am the prince, and I would like to keep it that way for now. Zhong nodded slowly. I suppose that is wise. You would have many enemies based on your parentage. Many in the Earth Kingdom would seek to use you. Discretion would be the better route. Which was a much better reason than I'm afraid my maybe friends won't like me anymore if they knew the truth. So he nodded. I told them to call me Lee for now. Again the man nodded. Zuko was not exactly a common name. In fact, it was reserved for royalty. There was no subtlety whatsoever. Lee, however, well, there was a million Lees. Yo, Zuko! Sokka's voice suddenly yelled as the teen appeared, and the paler teen winced, glad that the Hawkeye was long since disappeared. Zhong eyed him wearily. You may wish to remind them. Right. The master shook his head. I'm off to begin training the Avatar. Lee, I expect you to join us as soon as you are free. Zuko bowed, and Sokka squinted in confusion. Dude, you didn't tell him your real name yet? He didn't make you take off your mask last night. He It's important that no one knows. Even if they all deserters, no one can know. Sokka squinted at him. That's your I'm lying voice. You're hiding something. Yeah, my identity. He gestured the scarf tied around his face and covering his scar. Something more than that, Sokka argued, and Zuko simply glared at him in response. Come on, man. You know you can trust me. He didn't say anything. Couldn't say anything. Why couldn't he think of anything to say? Instead, his hands pulsed, relaxing and forming fists over and over again. Sokka sighed. Fine. It doesn't matter because I trust you, okay? I can do that first, and I think that's fair because you're probably super out of practice in that kind of stuff. Like hugging. You'll get there. So for now, let's just go find Katara and Aang. You can get your flame on. Katara can do her magic water, and I can try to find a place far enough away to fish. But close enough to watch an actual adult try to handle Aang. Zuko snorted and accepted the arm Sokka threw over his shoulder. Speaking of Katara, she was kind of acting weird today. Oh, that. Congratulations. You're officially part of the gang. Yeah, you're just going to have to get used to it. Is that a threat? You know what? Sure. A threat of hugs and mother puffin leaming. Zuko snorted and rolled his eyes. They lapsed in silence for a moment until they came up to the scene of Aang standing on a rock in front of the master. Zuko frowned. The Avatar's legs were too close together. He'd need to... there it was. When they were just barely out of hearing range, Zuko forced himself to speak. I do trust you. I know. I'll let Katara know about the Lee thing. Thanks. Lee! Zhong yelled. Standing meditation. Zuko immediately moved into position, legs spread wide and knees bent at a nearly 90-degree angle, his hands folded into the shape of the flame. Immediately the pose brought him to a familiar headspace of calm emptiness, as he focused on nothing more than the heat of the sun and his own inner fire. Aang's face scrunched, but then he dropped into a perfect imitation of Zuko's form. Now what? He asked the master. Now concentrate. Good, he said, walking away as Aang's face warped into an intense grimace. Wait, what do I do now? He asked, breaking form. Silence. Talking is not concentrating. Look at your friends. He commented, gesturing at Zuko and Katara, the latter of whom was focusing on juggling a large blob of water. Are they talking? Even that oaf knows to concentrate on what he's doing. Sokka looked up from where he was fishing to make a sound of protest, but made no other attempt to move. Zuko had to fight not to laugh and diminish the master's words. What am I concentrating on? Aang asked. Feel the heat of the sun. It is the greatest source of fire. Zuko couldn't completely avoid shuddering at that, feeling the stares of Katara and Sokka on his back. Even Aang glanced his way before returning his attention to Zhong. Yet it is in complete balance with nature. But when do I actually get to make fire? Concentrate, the man yelled, stalking up to Zuko as the Water Tribe teens giggled at Aang scowling. You as well, Lee. Concentrate on the sun, on how it hits your chi and joins with your inner fire. Zuko nodded, but moved forward to stand opposite Aang. The boy had a pout on his face, but Zuko snapped to get his attention before taking deep, deliberate breaths. After a few moments, Aang's breathings matched his and they concentrated on the sun together. Are you still doing this? Sokka asked, collapsing on the bit of soft grass beside Zuko. The fire teen glanced at the Water Tribe boy and didn't answer, Zhang had released him and Aang from their sun meditation after a few hours. He'd taken Aang up a mountain, presumably to make him work on his breathing control at a higher altitude, and set Zuko up with a basic don't let it burn practice. When he was a kid in the palace, it had been done with a bit of rice paper held in a circular hoop, but the leaf worked surprisingly well as a replacement. It was well into the afternoon by now, and Zuko's leaf was still smoldering, but it was still approximately the size of Zhang's thumb. Yes, it's a good thing. It means I have good control. But you've been doing nothing but sit here for hours. Aren't you bored? Zuko didn't know how to explain that he'd done so much more than sit there. He's listened to bird songs and leaves moving. He felt the sun and the wind and the grass. He smelled the wildflowers and the spring water. He fire-bent. He'd done more of these last few hours than he had in days back in the cave. He didn't know how to say it, though, so he simply said, no. Nothing to add to that? Okay. Well, Aang just got back from the mountain, in case you're wondering. Zuko frowned. Did he come back, or did Master Zhang bring him back? He came back on his own. That probably means he wasn't supposed to do that, was he? No, Zuko sighed. Sokka sighed. He was already going into Zhang's hut when I left to find you. Wanted to help me do damage control. Not especially. But he moved to get to his feet. Before either of them could move, however, Zhang appeared along the path. He frowned at the scene. Are you distracting my student? Maybe? Zhang scowled, but expression eased when Zuko handed him the leaf, hole still tightly contained. Good. You have impressive control, considering. Uncle used to tell me the story of the captive bender. I tried to practice when I still could, and even when I couldn't, I still moved my chi. The man nodded, as I would expect from the nephew of the Grand Master. Come, I believe you're ready to learn a different technique of your uncle's. One does not need to make fire to control the flame needed to steep tea. Sokka frowned as he followed the master. Wait, does that mean he knows Uncle T? He knows who you are. I thought you said he didn't know who you are. I never said that. Then why? Oaf! Some things are not as necessary for you to know. Oh, you see, there is literally nothing you can have said that would make me want to know more. Sokka. Fine. I trust you, blah blah. You can wait till you're ready, yada yada. I'm going to go figure out if a Fire Nation spear feels the same as a Water Tribe spear. Zuko watched the young Ting duck around to bother some of Zhang's warriors and snorted with amusement. He figured the chances of Sokka getting stabbed was about 50-50. Maybe more if he was especially annoying. So probably 80-20. Zuko followed Zhang into his hut and focused on keeping a single flame as steady as possible. As promised, Zhang used the fire to heat water for tea, in tune enough with the heat that Zuko controlled that he could grunt whenever the boy's control slipped by more than a few degrees. While he controlled the flame, Zhang guided him in a game of Pai Sho, a game he was largely forgotten beyond the secret code, but the team knew it would be a better cover if he could actually play, even if he didn't play well. He'd forgotten how much he hated this game. The tea scalded when Zhang took his earth tile for the third game in a row, and when the master won a few moves later, he sighed and got to his feet. I do not believe we need to work on control any longer. What? Is this because of the tea? I didn't... The firebender held up a hand, palm flat. You kept the temperature admirably well while concentrating on the game. I believe your claim that you used your time in captivity to strengthen your control. Now it is time to work on your katas, so that when you are able to produce a flame again, you have the basics to go from. That is, assuming you haven't also worked on those? Zuko paused and bowed. I'm sure I could always learn from a master such as you, Sifu Zhang, he said diplomatically. His face was stern and blank, but I couldn't stop the relief that finally came from his court manners were reappearing now that he was back among his people. Not that he'd ever been practically skilled at that. The man simply grunted in reply and pushed back the curtain of the hut. A pair of firebenders blinked to see Aang sitting in a humble bow on the rock outside the hut door. Zuko got over his surprise first and nodded in approval before the boy could even speak. I thought about what you said. I promise I'll be more patient. Aang said. Zuko stepped back. He knew the boy was powerful, but for fire one needed practice, discipline, and control. If he had really been waiting here for as long as Zuko thought, then he was making progress. Zhang was a good teacher. The elder firebender seemed to see the same thing as Zuko and said, "We're going to work with fire now." Aang immediately shot to his feet, pure joy stretching across his face, and for a moment it enlightened Zuko to see someone as genuinely excited about his element as he was. Though Aang wore it a little more obviously, Zhang set him up with the same leaf exercise that Zuko had been working on earlier, and led the more experienced teen a little further away. The man had just begun walking Zuko through a kata, one of the more basic ones that existed, whose steps were etched in the stone floor of the cave he'd been trapped in, when a spearman ran up to them. "Master, there is trouble." Zhang straightened immediately, yelling at Zuko as he followed the man. "Go to the Avatar. Pack up what you can. My men would not disturb me if it wasn't an emergency." Zuko didn't hesitate, running back to the stretch of river where they had left the others. His good eye widened in horror at the scene he'd come up to. Aang was juggling a flame, basically throwing it over his head like it was a harmless ball of air. Juggling the flaming fire, it was like a rock or a ball. He even ran faster, calling for Aang, but that didn't stop the boy from crouching and spinning in perfect mockery of the juggler they had seen at the festival. He wasn't fast enough. Why was he never enough? The boy stood with his hands lifted high to let out a circular wave of fire, so large that even a master could struggle to control it. He was heedless of Katara standing so close. Too close. Why was she that close? Zuko yelled, "No!" and threw out his hands in a desperate attempt to wreath control of the flames, but his cry was lost in Katara's screams of pain. His bending did nothing more than pull licks of flame his way, tease across his splayed palms. Katara collapsed onto herself, clutching her arm to her chest as Sokka, Aang, and Zuko rushed to her aid. Sokka turned to Aang with a fury in his eyes that made Zuko shiver. But he ignored the confrontation. Aang stumbled apologies and pulled Katara to his feet. "Come on, I have some salve in my pack. The sooner we can get it on, the better." "Katara, The Avatar started, but Zuko was not in the mood. "You've done enough, Aang." The teen seethed angrily, leading the still sobbing waterbender up the hill, and Sokka got angrier. Zuko's stuff was still packed in Appa's saddle, but as always the bison was faithfully right where they had left him, relaxing contentedly just inside the main section of the camp proper. Camp was even busier than it had been in the morning, but Zuko paid it no mind to lead Katara to the portion of the camp that was against the riverbank. "Try to clean the wounds if you can. Bend the water so it's colder. It will help with the pain." He took a deep breath, remembering what the healer had told him when his face had been burned. He eyed the arm held against the clear water. "You'll scar, but the sooner you can get the salve on, the better. I think it dispersed before it could do too much damage. As long as it doesn't get infected, you should be able to move your hands naturally. It shouldn't even harm your bending. I'm going to go get that salve. I'll be right back. Don't move." Katara sniffled, her voice sounding watery and strained. "Thanks, Zuko." "It's going to be okay, Katara," he promised, and ran off on unsteady feet to grab the medical supplies. By the time his shaking hands had managed to pull out the salve, he'd stolen it from the convent when they met with the Water Tribe warrior. He wasn't planning on going anywhere without burn salve ever again. Katara was standing with completely healed hands, and Zhang had arrived. The two were talking, concentrating on the girl's perfectly healed hands. "But you're a great master," she protested against something the firebender had said. "You have powers I'll never know." "Water brings healing and life," Zhang replied, "but fire brings only destruction and pain. It forces those of us burdened with it to care to walk a razor edge between humanity and savagery. Eventually we're torn apart." Zuko felt cold and too hot all at once. When he spoke, his voice was hot with rage, and he hadn't felt in years. "Is that what you've been teaching the Avatar?" he asked, his voice harsh and angry. Zhang barely glanced at him. "I understand that losing this curse does not make one free. The curse is one that, once given, cannot be given up until death. I do not begrudge your desire to relearn, not when so many meet their deaths when the curse is lifted. But you must admit the relief you feel in knowing that for a few moments you are free from being a herald of destruction." "No! No, I don't feel relief at all, and neither should you. If you face that darkness, that cold, that unknown, that helplessness, fire isn't just destruction, it isn't just death. Fire is fire is light and warmth and safety, and fire is life. Suddenly it was like power rushing through him, and whether it was the pure rage and passion he felt at that moment, his chi being activated by the practice, or something else he wasn't sure of, he felt a greater connection to the flame than he ever felt before. He swept his hands out in front of him, and suddenly every cooking fire in the camp went out. Zuko glared at Zhang, chi jutting out proudly and eyes burning. Good luck cooking your meals without fire. Try making drinkable water, he gestured to Etta Healer's hut. Good luck brewing medical teas, sanitizing bandages, cauterizing wounds. He pointed to the sun in Zhang's own words, the ultimate source of fire. The sun gives warmth, gives the day. He turned to the waterbender. You're from the water tribe. You know what the world is like without the sun. You live through it every winter. Tell me, Katara, does anything grow without the sun? Do the animals move? Would anyone in your tribe ever survive the winter if you didn't have fire? He was spitting sparks now, creating flame with his mouth when his hands couldn't hold it. He met Zhang's eyes. The Avatar needs to learn control. He should never have tried to learn fire before mastering earth and fire, but even when he is ready to learn, you are not going to be the one to teach him. The rest of the nations have poised Aang against her element enough. He doesn't need his master doing it too. For several long moments, Zuko just stood, panting heavily, exhausted by the bending and from using so many words at once. But Zhang looked surprised. He seemed contemplative. Perhaps. Regardless, I think it is clear that I was never my destiny to teach the Avatar. It is yours. Mine? But after he has mastered the other elements. He must know the movement and flow of water and the determination and steadfastness of earth, before he can have the control and power of fire. Zuko shook his head. But, I was never even... Suddenly, a wall of fire erupted from the direction of the river, and Zhang barely had time to throw a flame shield before it hit. They didn't look down the river to see a trio of familiar boats cutting through the water. Zhao, Zuko sneered, fingers twitching for his swords, for his flames. Zhao had held Aang like a prisoner, had chased him down like a particularly elusive type of game. Zhao had smiled at the Agni Kai. Go get your friends and flee, Zhang commanded. Do not come back here or you will be destroyed. Hurry! Katara and Zuko jumped onto Appa, leading the bison to the part of the river where they had last seen Aang and Sokka. Sokka was running out of their temporary housing, pack slung over his back. Katara, are you okay? He asked. I'm fine. Where's Aang? The boy pointed at Zhang's hut and Katara ran for it as Sokka and Zuko secured their supplies. Is she really okay? He asked Zuko softly as they tied down bags. The firebender nodded. She can heal. It's like she's never injured. It's amazing, Sokka. The young team relaxed. Previously bowed, tight shoulders slumped as he took a deep, shuddering breath. Good. Then after a moment, normal Sokka was back. Man, where was that ability when I got 2 fishers stuck in my thumb? 2? Well, you see, Guys! Katara yelled, running up to them. Aang went after Zhao. What? Sokka asked. Zuko simply cursed. Running through the bushes, the siblings followed on Appa. He dashed through the trees, but by the time he got caught up with the fight, Zhang was gone. Aang was easily dodging sloppy firebending, and Zhao was setting his own ships on fire. A few of Zhao's men were in the woods, evidently seeking the deserters. Zuko proved a good distraction to keep them from actually finding anything. However, when Sokka called for Aang, Zuko joined as well, and it was long before they were all on the bison, leaving Zhao and his burning ships behind. For a moment they didn't move, instead relishing in the simple fact that they had somehow made it out of yet another impossible situation. Then Katara inhaled sharply. Aang, you're burned. Zuko blinked to see part of the other boy's orange cloak had been burned away, leaving reddened skin beneath the circle of soot. He automatically reached for his salve, but before he could even find it, the girl had glowing water encircling her hand. Oh well, never mind then. Wow, that's good water, Aang said with a dopey grin. Katara smiled back, excitement lighting up her eyes before turning to Zuko. You too. I saw you pull the fire away from Aang. Your hands must hurt. Zuko grimaced. He'd been able to ignore it for the most part, but while fighting, But now the things were calm, and she brought attention to it, the stinging pain as his hands were becoming unbearable. Thanks, he grunted, accepting the help. It felt weird, kind of tickly, cooling sensation. It was odd to watch the blistering skin become like new, just like that. If he had something like that right after the Agni Kai? No. No, he couldn't think like that. He needed to think of something else. Aang was watching him with remorseful puppy eyes. Nope, not that. Something else. Unfortunately, Aang was oblivious to Zuko's reluctance. I'm really sorry, Zuko. I didn't mean to hurt you. Any of you. I already told Katara, but I'm never going to firebend ever again. No, Zuko said simply. What? No, he repeated firmly. Fire isn't bad, Aang. It can be used for bad, but so can water, so can earth, so can air. There are earthquakes and landslides and tornadoes all the time. People drown every day. Fire can be good too. We tried to push you, tried to make you learn things the wrong way. We won't make that mistake again, and you will firebend, Aang. I'll make sure of it, even if I have to teach you myself. The younger boy swallowed heavily and avoided eye contact, and Zuko frowned. He was about to try again when surprisingly Katara spoke up. He's right, Aang. You really should have heard him earlier. It's important. We don't think about it, but Sokka and I wouldn't be alive without it. She glanced at Zuko. That was really interesting. I never thought about how much we rely on the sun and the South Pole. We pay almost more attention to it than the moon to keep track of the seasons and the crops. Zuko shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Well, it's not that weird. The Fire Nation is an island nation. We have to pay a lot of attention to the tides and stuff. The moon is almost as important to the Fire Nation as it is to the Water Tribe. I heard that Admiral Zhao has requested a siege against the Northern Water Tribe, Arrow said, positioned respectfully on the floor in front of Ozai's throne. The Fire Lord eyed his brother suspiciously. Yes, it is time we stop their resistance once and for all. Arrow did not mention that the Water Tribe's resistance was that of the Benderless Southern Tribe, nor did he mention that the Northern Tribe had become isolates, not even tending to the Fire Nation waters in decades. Instead, he simply nodded. Ozai, however, seemed to hear what Iroh did not say. Why are you here, brother? I believe it has been nearly 3 years since the event of the courts held any interest to you. Iroh gritted his teeth at the remembrance of his brother's cruelty, his inhumanity at his son, but he forced himself to breathe. I believe that it is far past time that my grief has run its course. I would like to offer my services on this expedition. The suspicion of the derision on the Fire Lord's face only deepened. And why have you come to this conclusion now? This war is coming to an end, brother. We are on the eve of Sozin's comet. The Avatar has returned and is but an untrained child. I believe that this war will end before the year is out. It is past time that I did my part to help further the might of our nation. Ozai didn't seem to believe it, but his suspicions were softened, likely due to the distraction given by Iroh's mention of an immediate victory. Likely due to the distraction given by Iroh's mention of immediate victory. Perhaps due to the appeal of getting Iroh out of the palace for a while on an actual suspension. Perhaps due to the appeal of getting Iroh out of the palace for a while on an actually sanctioned trip. The dragon and the rest chose to butter it up even more. I would be more used to Zhao on that ship than I am to you here, brother. We have not had an organized assault on waterbenders in nearly 80 years. The southern benders were all captured, and the northern have holed themselves up. We do not have any general experience with their fighting style, and I have studied them. I studied their bending. I know their techniques in a way that no other living general to boast. I simply wish to serve my nation. He bowed low, his head touching the floor and waiting. Finally, after a low moment of silence, Ozai spoke. I will accept this request. Iroh grinned, though the expression was gone by the time he sat upright. Thank you, Fire Lord. Ozai waved a courier over and commanded a letter be sent to Zhao. A simple flick of the hand dismissed Iroh, but the prince grimaced. But the prince ignored the disrespect and walked out of the room calmly. In his pocket crinkled a bit of parchment he received the night before. Speaking of Pai Sho, I met a young man who played well. He claims his uncle taught him the game. It is good to know that the ancient ways are being preserved by the new generation. He holds each of the elements tiles nearby, and relies heavily on the water moves. His playing style reminds me of our mutual friend to the north. I recommend they play together if his journey should bring him that way. Now in regards to that oolong you sent. Iroh ran his hand over the folded letter one final time, his heart beating steadily and sure in his chest, but his face was split with a grin. Finally, his nephew had emerged. He had to pack.